Welcome back, night listeners, to Nakora Nights. Alberta looks peaceful from the outside. Quiet farms, lonely highways, small towns covered in snow, but behind that silence, some of the darkest stories Canada has ever whispered. Tonight, we're stepping into 10 true small-town horror stories from Alberta. Encounters so disturbing, locals refuse to talk about them even today. A street where every house keeps the lights on all night, except one. A neighbor who stood outside in the snow for hours, staring at the same window. And the town where people hear knocking on their doors, but when they open them, the footprints in the snow lead toward the house, not away. These aren't ghost tales. These are real accounts from people who lived in towns too small to hide their secrets, and too haunted to forget them. Before we step into Alberta's frozen shadows, tell me, where are you watching from right now? And what time is it where you are? Because if it's late, some towns go quiet for a reason. If you're ready to uncover what hides in the snow, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment saying, "I'm still awake." Now, pull your coat tighter, don't look toward the window, and whatever you hear, don't open the door. This is 10 Untold Most Disturbing True Alberta Small-Town Horror Stories. Let's begin. I was 13 when it happened, the kind of night that never really leaves you, no matter how many winters pass. Calgary summers have this strange silence after midnight, when the streets hum like they're holding their breath, and the sky glows with that soft orange haze from far-off streetlights. That night, I woke up to it, the sound that cracked the silence wide open. My parents were yelling. It was just after 2:30 a.m., and my sister Leah was snoring softly in the bed across from mine. The window beside me was open, letting in the dry prairie wind that smelled faintly of dust and pine. I could hear every word my parents shouted from the back. The words weren't clear, but their voices carried that kind of fear you can feel in your bones. They never fought like that. Not outside, not loud enough for us to hear. And yet there it was, the sharp edge of panic in my mother's voice, the deep trembling anger in my father's. Leah stirred, groaned, then got up and peeked through the curtain. "They're fighting again," she whispered, half annoyed, half tired. I told her to go back to sleep. She did. I shut the window to drown out the sound, lay back, and stared at the ceiling until everything went quiet. We forgot about it by morning, completely. Kids do that, you move on. It wasn't until years later, almost 15 years, that I found out what really happened that night. I was 28, visiting home for the first time in months. Calgary had grown colder since I left, the wind harsher, the houses smaller somehow. My parents looked older too. That evening, while unpacking my bags in my old room, I overheard my mother telling a story to my aunt in the kitchen. The tone in her voice froze me in place. It wasn't the soft, storytelling kind. It was the careful, haunted kind. She didn't know I was listening. Apparently, that night, after Leah and I had gone to bed, the phone rang. Not a cell phone. We didn't have those yet. The old white landline that hung on the kitchen wall, with the long, curly cord that always twisted. My dad answered first. The voice on the other end wasn't normal. It came through something called an electronic interpreter, the kind people who are deaf used back then to communicate over the phone. My mom explained it later. You type your words, and the interpreter reads them out loud to the listener. Then, when the listener speaks, the interpreter types it back for the deaf person to read. Simple in theory, harmless in most cases. But that night wasn't harmless. The call started normally. The interpreter said someone wanted to speak with my parents. The person on the other end typed their words fast, almost too fast for the operator to keep up. My mom said it started with small talk, like they knew us somehow. Then the messages got strange. The person typed both my parents' full names, then mine, then Leah's. And then, line by line, they began describing our house. The green door, the chipped paint near the handle, the hanging flower pot beside the steps. They even knew about the small crack in the kitchen window, the one my dad always said he'd fix but never did. My father thought it was a prank at first. Someone from work maybe pulling a sick joke. But then the interpreter paused, and the next line came through slowly. I'm outside. The The interpreter read the words out loud, trembling. My mom said she could hear the unease in their voice. My dad walked toward the back door, phone pressed to his ear. He asked, "If you're out there, then what am I doing right now?" Silence for a few seconds. Then the interpreter read the next words. "You're holding the phone in your left hand and waving your right hand in the air." And that was exactly what he was doing. My dad froze. My mom said she saw his eyes widen before he turned toward the dark backyard. The person on the line continued describing everything they could see: the worn-out patio chairs, the faint light from the kitchen window, my mom's reflection in the glass, even the color of her robe. Then came the message that changed everything. "I'm going to come inside. I'm going to dismember the girls first." That's when my mom started screaming. That's when Leah and I heard them from our room. Dad charged outside like a storm. No flashlight, no shoes. Just rage. My mom dropped the phone, grabbed it again, and dialed the police with shaking fingers. The line clicked dead before she could even finish the call. She said it sounded like static swallowed the connection. The backyard was big, dark, tangled with spruce trees and uneven patches of grass. Beyond the fence was a slope that led down toward a stretch of train tracks. Perfect place for someone to hide. Dad ran across the yard, shouting, daring whoever it was to show themselves. But no one did. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. 2 cruisers, lights flashing red and blue against the quiet neighborhood. They searched everywhere behind the shed, under the deck, even near the train tracks, but found nothing. No footprints, no signs of entry, no movement, nothing. The call couldn't be traced. The interpreter service made it impossible. Back then, people could connect anonymously through temporary systems. The cops told my parents it wasn't the first time someone had used it for harassment. But none of those other cases involved detailed descriptions like that. None mentioned children by name. My mom said my dad didn't sleep for weeks. He'd sit on the back patio every night with a baseball bat across his lap, staring into the trees. Sometimes he'd think he saw movement, but it was always just shadows. She said that one night, around 3:20 a.m., he saw something move near the fence. A figure tall, motionless, wearing what looked like a long coat. When he called out, it vanished. He never mentioned it again. Years passed, and the memory faded. My parents eventually moved to a quieter part of Calgary near Evergreen, away from that old house. I never thought much of it. Until a few months ago, I moved into a small apartment downtown for work. It was one of those older brick buildings with thin walls and flickering hallway lights. My first week there, I noticed something odd. Every night, when I took the train home from work, I'd see the same man standing on the C-train platform, always in a suit, always staring, not at his phone, not at the schedule, just straight ahead. At me. He never got on the train. Never moved. Just watched until I left. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was just spaced out, but it kept happening. Every night. Same platform, same time, same dead stare. Then one night, I got home and found something wedged under my apartment door, a piece of paper. It was a drawing, childlike, done in crayon, a picture of my apartment's living room. Every detail was right. The couch, the table, the lamp, even the crooked frame on the wall. There was no note. Just the drawing. I called building security, but the cameras in my hallway were down that night. Conveniently, they said, maintenance issue. Over the next week, it happened 3 more times, each drawing showing a different room. My kitchen, my bathroom, my bedroom. The last one showed my bed with 2 stick figures drawn under it. I didn't sleep that night. By 2:49 a.m., I heard it, the soft sound of footsteps outside my window. My apartment is on the 2nd floor, but the sound was too close, too heavy to be just wind. I turned off my bedside lamp and listened. The sound stopped. Then, faintly, I heard the creak of a cigarette being lit. The smell drifted through the air vent, fresh smoke. It reminded me of something my dad said once, years after that night in Calgary. He told me how, for months after the call, he'd find cigarette butts outside our bedroom window. Always freshly smoked, always around 2 a.m. That memory hit me like a punch to the chest. I called the police again. They came, searched around the building, found nothing. But when I asked if I could review the security footage from outside, they said the cameras had glitched. Again. By now, I was barely sleeping. Every noise felt like a warning. Every reflection in the window looked like a face. My coworkers said I looked pale, haunted even. I didn't tell them why. One evening, coming back from work, I saw him again. The man in the suit. But this time, he wasn't on the platform. He was standing across the street from my apartment, half hidden by the lamplight, hands folded neatly in front of him. He didn't move. Didn't speak. I ran inside, locked the door, and didn't look out again that night. 2 days later, I found another note under my door. Not a drawing this time, just a message written in perfect block letters. "Do you remember me?" I dropped it like it burned. The next night, my phone rang. Not my cell phone. The landline my landlord insisted every apartment keyed for emergencies. The display said, "Unknown." My stomach dropped. I almost didn't answer. But I did. When I picked up, there was a pause. Then a soft, metallic voice began to speak, robotic, stilted, like it was being read through an interpreter. The words came slow at first. "It's been a long time." I froze. My throat dried out. The voice continued. "You never saw me that night, but I saw you." I couldn't breathe. I tried to hang up, but the phone wouldn't respond. My fingers pressed the button over and over. Nothing. Then came the words that nearly made me scream. "You're wearing a gray sweater and sitting by the window." I turned toward the glass. The reflection showed nothing behind me. Just the faint city lights flickering across the sky. I whispered, "What do you want?" Silence. Then, "I want to finish what I started." That was the last thing before the line went dead. I moved out the next morning, left everything behind, clothes, furniture, even my dishes. I didn't care. I packed one suitcase, drove straight out of Calgary, and never went back. But sometimes, late at night when the wind hits my new window just right, I hear it again. The faint tap of ash against glass, the sound of a match being struck. And every time, I wonder if he ever really left. I always believed that the most frightening things in life came from imagination, the shadows we shape into monsters because we fear being alone. I never expected real footsteps in the dark to prove me wrong. My name is Morrison Hart, and the night everything changed still sits in my bones like ice that never melts. For most of my life, I lived in the quiet outskirts of North Edmonton in a neighborhood people called Birch Lane, a cluster of older houses lined up along trees that creaked even when there was no wind. People describe the area as peaceful, but peaceful places sometimes hold the most silence, and silence can hide footsteps better than noise ever could. Edmonton felt like a small town inside a big city, especially on cold nights when the streets were empty and the sky hung low. Back then, I worked at a loading dock near Yellowhead Trail, the kind of rough job that demanded heavy lifting, late hours, and a numbness to the cold that came with being outside more than inside. I was strong, tall, and built like someone who should not scare easily, but fear does not look at the size of your shoulders. It looks straight at your heart. Before that night, I had been living with my fiancée, Alea, for a little over a year. She was soft-spoken, calm, barely 5 feet 5 inches tall, and light as a feather, but stronger inside than anyone I ever met. Our house was a split-level blue home, one of those older structures where you walk in the front door and face 2 half staircases, one leading up to the living room and the other sinking down into the basement. The only way to the backyard was through the sliding glass door upstairs, which opened onto a narrow deck with steps that led down into the yard. The place always felt quiet at night, a little too quiet, the kind of quiet that fills your ears like a warning you pretend not to hear. At that time, I partied too much, way more than I should have, drowning myself in alcohol on weekends and weekdays without caring which was which. I usually crashed at friends' places afterward, leaving Alea alone in the house with our 3 Great Danes. They were massive dogs, gentle inside but terrifying when they barked, and their size alone could stop a grown man from walking closer. I used to believe that meant she was safe, no matter what hour it was, but I was wrong. My drinking had become a shadow that followed every part of our life, and I ignored it until the consequences clawed their way up our stairs one night. Something in Edmonton had been unsettling me long before the break-in happened. Every night after my late shifts, I walked home between 2:17 a.m. and 3 in the morning, passing the same streetlight, the same fences, the same houses. For almost a month, a black SUV sat idling near the corner across from my place, engine humming like a slow heartbeat, windows tinted too dark to see inside. The first night, I shrugged it off. By the 5th night, I noticed the engine never turned off. On the 10th night, I stopped pretending it meant nothing, though I said nothing to Alea because she already worried enough about my choices. I tried to forget the SUV, but forgetting is not the same as being safe. Around that same time, a man approached me near White Avenue while I was grabbing food after work. I had never seen him before, but he walked straight up to me with a crooked grin and whispered my full name, the school I once attended, and the warehouse I worked at, then walked away laughing softly, tapping his fingers against his own neck like he knew something I did not. I stood frozen, my heart pounding, trying to convince myself it was just some drunk stranger messing around, but the uneasiness stayed with me like a cold hand resting on my spine. I found a new job soon after, one that required random alcohol tests that forced me into sudden sobriety. I had been sober for only 2 days when Alea told me how relieved she was that I had started sleeping at home again. I brushed it off, kissed her forehead, told her I loved her, and promised things would get better. I meant it, but promises do not always reach far enough. Later that evening, we were watching TV downstairs. The dogs were sprawled out on the floor, comfortable and calm, when I heard something outside. It was faint, like the soft drag of a shoe across frozen grass. The dogs perked up, ears raised, but they did not bark. I tried to dismiss it, thinking maybe a cat had wandered into the yard. Edmonton had plenty of strays. But then the noise came again, closer this time, sharper, deliberate, not like a cat, not like anything natural. Alea muted the TV instantly, her expression tightening with fear. She stared toward the ceiling as if the sound were crawling across it. I asked what was wrong, but before she answered, I heard the sliding door upstairs slam open, a forceful sound that punched through the house. All 3 dogs shot to their feet and bolted toward the stairs, barking so violently the walls seemed to shake. I followed right behind them, my heart racing. As I reached the top of the second staircase, I saw the silhouette of a man dressed head to toe in black rushing across our deck. He yanked the sliding door shut behind him and jumped off the steps into the yard. Everything inside me snapped awake. Adrenaline hit me so hard I felt almost outside my own body. The dogs pushed past me, desperate to chase him. I threw the door open and followed them out into the freezing air. I grabbed the heavy flashlight we kept near the door, one of those long metal mag lights that feel more like weapons than tools. By the time I made it down the deck stairs, the dogs were losing their minds at the back fence, barking and growling like they were ready to break it apart. I sprinted toward them and climbed over just in time to see the man reaching the opposite fence. His clothes were completely black, thick hoodie pulled tight around his face, black cargo pants, gloves, everything designed to hide who he was. I barely missed grabbing him as he pulled himself over the top of the fence. I followed him again, leaping over the boards and landing hard on the frosty ground on the other side. I saw him sprinting toward the street and rounding the corner of my neighbor's house. I chased him as fast as I could, turning the corner just in time to see him jump into an old, battered pickup truck. The engine roared to life, and he sped off, tires screeching, disappearing down the dim road like a shadow swallowed by deeper darkness. I stood there panting, chilled air cutting into my lungs, watching the taillights fade. My hands were shaking as the weight of what had just happened came crashing down. I turned and ran back to the house, terrified of what I might find. When I reached the living room, Alea was sitting on the couch, the largest kitchen knife gripped tightly in her trembling hands, the dogs surrounding her like a protective wall. She looked shaken but safe. When I asked if she was hurt, she shook her head and said she had been ready to help if I needed her. We called the police, gave descriptions, checked the house 3 more times, locked every window and door, and turned back on the lights. After all that, neither of us felt tired. Our hearts still raced with leftover fear. We tried watching another movie to calm down, though nothing felt normal anymore. During the movie, I asked her how she knew the noises outside were not just cats. She hesitated before telling me something that chilled me deeper than the cold air outside. For almost a month, she said, she had been hearing strange sounds late at night, footsteps in the yard, whispering outside the windows, soft taps near the back door. Things that made her feel watched, but never certain enough to call anyone. I asked why she never told me. She lowered her head and said she did not want to add more stress while I was dealing with my drinking. Her words hit me harder than any punch I had ever taken. I realized then that whoever this man was, he had been watching our house. He had seen that I was usually gone at night. He had studied our routines. He had known she was alone. Why he chose this night to enter, I did not know, but something told me he had expected the house to be empty, quiet, unprotected, and I suddenly remembered the black SUV. The engine running every night. The stranger near White Ave whispering my personal information. The chill that followed me home for weeks. Something else happened soon after, something I never told Alea. One morning, I found a small rubber mold inside our mailbox. At first, I thought some kids had dropped trash into it, but when I picked it up, I realized the shape was familiar. It was the impression of a key, a perfect mold of our front door key. Someone had copied it. Someone had already planned a way inside long before that night. What terrified me most was knowing he could have walked into our home any night I was gone. Any night my fiancée slept alone. Any night her breath was the only thing between her and absolute danger. We changed the locks the same day. We added cameras. We added brighter lights outside. But none of it erased the feeling that someone had been inside our world long before we noticed, someone who might still be watching. For weeks, I'd barely slept. Every creak in the floor felt like a footstep. Every shadow looked like a person. Every car engine outside made my skin crawl. I kept replaying that moment on the deck, the man's silhouette vanishing into the night, and I wondered what he wanted, what he planned, why he chose us. The black SUV returned only once after that. It sat across the street around 3:19 a.m., engine humming, windows dark. I stood at my window, frozen, watching. The engine stayed on for several minutes, then shut off. The interior light flickered for a moment. A figure sat inside, unmoving. The SUV stayed there until the sun began to rise, then drove away without any sign of the driver stepping out. I never saw it again. The police never found the man or the pickup truck. They said break-ins happen and people panic, and sometimes fear fills in the details. But fear did not leave a key mold in my mailbox. Fear did not whisper my full name. Fear did not slam my sliding door open. To this day, I still think about that moment when I saw him running across the deck. Something about the way he moved felt wrong, not desperate or rushed, but controlled, like he had done this before. Like he knew exactly where to step, exactly where to run, exactly how far I could chase him. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and the world outside is frozen still, I swear I hear whispering near the window, faint, soft, like someone repeating my name from a distance I cannot measure. I do not know if it is real or if memory has twisted itself into something I can hear, but either way, the fear feels the same. Some people think horror lives in haunted houses or dark forests, but real horror lives in the knowledge that someone once stood outside your door, waited, watched, learned your habits, and entered your house while you were inside. Real horror lives in the fact that you never learned his name, and he knew everything about you. The night he broke in changed me. It forced me to get sober, to protect the woman I love, to face the truth that danger does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it steps right into your home without hesitation. And sometimes it leaves only so it can return when you least expect it. I never thought childhood could rot inside a person, but mine still knocks in my head every night, like something trapped behind a door that will not stay shut. I grew up in Red Deer, Alberta, in a tiny neighborhood that looked safe from the outside, but inside those quiet streets, something hunted us for months. Even now, I do not sleep without checking every window, every corner, every shadow. I tell this story because pretending it never happened has not helped me. Maybe releasing it will. I was the youngest of 6, the little one everyone carried around like a toy, and my family was falling apart even before the nightmare began. My father was not loyal to my mother, and she clung to him with a kind of desperate love that blinded her to everything else, including us. Our house had one old car, so whenever he needed a ride home from work, she left all 6 of us alone. Sometimes, she did not even go to pick him up. She went to spy on him to see if he was cheating again. I did not understand this then, but I feel the scars of her choices now. The first night it happened, I was eating with my older sister, the 2 of us watching some late-night show on a small TV. My other siblings were scattered around the living room, tired, quiet, waiting for Mom to come home. I finished my snack and walked to the kitchen with my sister to throw something away. The garbage bin sat beside a huge window facing the backyard. The moment I stepped beside it, I felt cold air on my neck, like something watching me. My sister turned her head and froze. Her scream burst out before I even saw what she saw. A man's face, pushed right up against the glass, his cheek flattened, his eyes wide, a small flashlight under his chin shining upward, making his smile look twisted and wrong. The light made it clear he was not drunk, not lost, not confused. He wanted us to see him. We ran. All of us ran upstairs, shaking and crying. We stayed in one room like a flock of frightened birds, and when my mother finally returned, she panicked, called the police, and told the neighbors to watch for strangers. But the men always disappeared before the cops arrived. Always. The nights kept coming, each one worse than the last. It was never just one man. There were several. Always different shadows, different shapes, moving around our yard, tapping on walls, breathing against windows. My mother cut down all the bushes in front of the house because they were hiding in them. I remember her hands shaking as she trimmed the branches, like she finally understood leaving us alone was dangerous, but she still kept leaving. They broke our kitchen window once. Only a crack, but when the glass split with a loud pop, I felt something break inside me too. One night, I was alone with the 2 siblings closest to my age, only 4 and 6. I still do not know why we were left alone that time. Maybe my mom was watching Dad again. Maybe she thought the men had stopped, but they had not. They returned angry that night, pounding on the front door, throwing rocks at the windows, shouting words we could not understand. We ran to my parents' bedroom upstairs, locked the door, and hid behind the bed. I cried until I could not breathe. My brother told us not to cry, to pretend we were brave people, heroes from stories, people who did not fear anything. Somehow it helped, but even pretending bravery could not stop the sound of the door rattling downstairs. When my parents came home, the banging stopped, just stopped. Like whoever it was had been listening. Then came the phone call. My older brother answered it. A man's voice laughed softly and said, "You people are so stupid," then hung up. That voice crawled into our house like smoke, invisible but deadly. My mother cried silently in her room that night, and the next morning she replaced nothing, repaired nothing, just stared at the phone like it was a weapon left on the table. The worst night was the one that still chokes me when I think about it. I was sleeping when my sister shook me, whispering that something was wrong. She pulled me to the landing at the top of the stairs. From there, we could see the front door. My oldest brother sat there with a shotgun across his lap, the barrel aimed at the door, his jaw locked in a way that made him look much older than he was. All my other siblings sat beside him, shaking but silent. I did not know much then, but I knew that if someone came through that door, we were not going to make it out the same. I sat beside them holding a stupid plastic dinosaur toy, squeezing it so hard my hand hurt. Time felt frozen, like the whole house was holding its breath. Then the sound came, soft at first, then violent. Banging on the door, harsh voices outside, something scraping against the wood. And the worst part, the front door was unlocked. No one had locked it earlier. My brother's voice broke the silence. "Come in." Everything stopped. The voices outside stopped. The banging stopped. Even the air seemed to stop moving, but no one entered. My parents arrived moments later, headlights washing across the living room. My father ran toward one of the fleeing shadows and caught him. He beat the man until he collapsed in the dirt. The police came soon after, and they told us something that made everything make sense and made everything worse. Our phone line had been tapped. The men knew when we were alone every single time. I do not know what happened to them afterward. No one tells me. My mother refuses to talk about it because she is a different person now. But the truth is, we should never have been left alone at all. Her obsession with keeping my father faithful left 6 children defenseless in a house hunted by grown men. Years later, I learned who they were. My father had cheated with a woman who wanted revenge. She recruited middle-aged men to terrorize us, children who had done nothing wrong. I found her online when I turned 18 and sent her the angriest message I could write. It did nothing. Nothing fixes the nights I still live through in my head, and those memories chase me. I wake at 2:17 a.m. thinking I hear tapping on my window. I walk through my house at 9:04 p.m., checking locks again and again. Every creak makes my heart jump. I am always listening, always watching, always remembering. And the world still shows me reminders. A teenage boy biking home through our neighborhood once saw a man following him, turning whenever he turned, stopping whenever he stopped, matching his path for half an hour. The boy told people, but they said maybe it was a misunderstanding. That is what people said about our shadows too, until the truth crawled out. A woman nearby found Polaroids of her car arranged on her porch, taken from different angles, each stamped with last night's exact time. She moved away within days. I do not blame her. You cannot live in Red Deer without feeling watched sometimes. And there is a man who knocks on doors now asking, "Is your basement still empty?" And he only chooses houses where single women live. The police say they are looking into it. That is what they said when we were kids too. My siblings and I stayed close because of all this. Trauma ties you together like rope. In knots you cannot undo. My oldest brother still thinks he has to protect us, even as adults. He still double-checks doors at family gatherings. He still sits facing the exits in restaurants. He still keeps the old shotgun locked in a case at his home, just in case. Sometimes, late at night, I imagine what would have happened if the man had stepped through our door the night my brother said, "Come in." Would my brother have pulled the trigger? Would we have made it out alive? Or would that moment have ended everything? And I wonder where those men are now. They would be in their 50s or 60s. Maybe they laugh about what they did. Maybe they think children forget, but I did not forget. Their shadows live inside me. Sometimes, when the wind hits my window the wrong way, I freeze like I am 3 years old again. Sometimes I think I see someone in my yard standing still waiting. Maybe my mind plays tricks. Maybe it does not. But I know this. If I ever see those men again, the ones who stole my childhood and poisoned my nights, I do not know what I would do. The fear inside me sometimes feels like fire, and fire spreads. I always believed small towns were safe, especially places like Lethbridge, where winter mornings smell like cold metal and the air feels thin enough to break. I grew up here, on the south side near the old river valley, and back then I thought danger was something that happened far away, in cities too big for their own good. I never knew that the quietest streets could hold the darkest corners, or that someone could remember you even after years of silence. Before everything happened, I was just a kid trying to make sense of the world. My name is Mason, and back then I was young enough to think walking home alone was normal. My mom trusted the neighborhood, trusted the space between the school and our apartment complex, trusted the short walk down the cracked sidewalk that cut through 2 rows of pale houses. Most days were peaceful, cold winds scraping my cheeks as the sky dimmed earlier each week, but that February changed everything. It changed the way I breathed, the way I stepped outside, the way shadows felt behind me. It was February, and I was small enough to be afraid but old enough to hide it. My mom let me walk home because our apartment was just a little distance from the school, barely 5 minutes if I didn't drag my feet. She always said, "Stay on the sidewalk, don't dawdle, go straight home." And I listened because nothing ever happened that made me doubt her. Then one day, something did. I remember the snow melting into slush, the sky dim though it was still afternoon. As I walked, a black car rolled slowly beside me. I couldn't remember the model then, and even now the memory blurs like fog on glass. The window slid down and a woman leaned toward me, her red hair bright against the dull day. She looked somewhere in her mid-30s, but her eyes felt older, too calm, too steady. She told me her name was Julia, and she said she was my father's sister. I froze, confused. My father left before I was born, and Mom told me he didn't have any sisters. He only had brothers. We had talked about it just days before because I kept asking questions she didn't want to answer but did anyway. So when Julia claimed she was part of his family, something inside me twisted. Instead of walking away like any smart kid, I told her my name because fear makes you forget your own rules. And she started asking things that felt wrong, things that felt like she shouldn't know. She asked where we went to school, how my brother was doing, how often we walked alone. Her voice was soft, almost friendly, but something underneath felt cold, like ice slowly forming. I told her I wasn't supposed to talk to strangers and turned away, walking as fast as I could. She kept driving beside me, slow and steady, saying she wasn't dangerous, she was just trying to help. She wanted to talk. My chest tightened. I felt my hands shake. I started running. She followed. When I reached our apartment complex, I ran up to the unit next to ours, pretending it was home. My brother once told me that if someone ever followed me, I should do that so they wouldn't know which door was ours. When I reached the steps, I looked back. The car was gone. I didn't tell my mom. I didn't want her to stop letting me walk alone. I didn't want to lose my sense of freedom. I thought maybe she was just weird, maybe she made a mistake, maybe I misunderstood. Then the next day came, and it happened again. The same black car, the same slow roll, the same red hair like blood on snow. This time she didn't pretend. She offered me a ride. She said she could take me somewhere warm. She said I looked cold. She said kids shouldn't walk alone. I told her no, leave me alone, and I started pacing faster, until I broke into a run like before, heading straight for the neighbor's door. She followed again, same speed, same steady crawl. Still, I said nothing to my mom. The next day was Saturday. I was outside with my brother, shooting hoops on the cracked basketball court beside the complex. Snow clung to the edges of the pavement, and our breath hung like ghosts in the air. My brother passed me the ball, but halfway to catching it, I froze. The black car rolled by, slow, almost watching. I dropped the ball and dragged my brother inside, telling him I felt sick. He believed me, because back then, he believed everything I said. Sunday was worse. After church, as we pulled into the complex, I saw her standing outside her car. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't pretending. She was waiting. Her body looked strange, like her stomach was too large for her thin legs, and her posture curved like she had been standing there for hours. My heart skipped. My hands shook. When we parked, I ran inside without a word, my mom and brother confused behind me. From the living room window, I watched her walk to the neighbor's door, the same one I always ran to. She knocked, waited, then walked away. Mom didn't know anything was wrong yet, but the knot in my chest grew until it felt like it might break my ribs. A moment later, our neighbor came to our unit, knocking lightly. Mom opened the door, smiling at first, but that smile faded as our neighbor spoke. She said a woman came looking for me, claiming she was a teacher and needed to speak with me. Something in Mom's face cracked like thin ice. She called my name. I stepped forward, and the truth spilled out of me faster than I could breathe. I cried, she cried, my neighbor frowned with worry. Mom said I should have told her, that she was scared of what could have happened. She said from now on I had to walk with my brother, no exceptions. She called the police. We both had to give statements. They asked questions about the car, the woman, the time she followed me. They said they would look into it. Days passed, then weeks, then months. We never heard back. By April, the sightings stopped. Mom relaxed, slowly. My brother forgot. Time made me believe it was over. And then years passed, and I truly forgot. Until yesterday. I was at Albert Sands with my best friends, laughing about nothing important, when I felt a tap on my shoulder. When I turned, my whole body froze. It was her. Her hair was duller now, her eyes deeper, her face older, but it was her. And she smiled like she had been waiting for me to turn around. She introduced herself again. My jaw hung open, my skin cold like frostbite. I tried to stay calm, tried to act normal, but fear crawled through me in sharp waves. When she offered to take me home, something inside me snapped. I grabbed my friend's arm and walked away as fast as I could without running. She remembers me. She still tries to get close. She is still here. I told my mom the moment I got home. We didn't know what to do. We still don't. But what scares me most is that she waited this long, years, watching, remembering. And things didn't stop there. Because after that day at the grocery store, strange things started happening again. At night, in the hallway outside my dorm at the university, I found things placed neatly at my door. At first it was a feather, small and gray, the kind birds leave behind near the coulees. Then it was strands of hair, long and red, like hers. One night it was chewed gum, pressed against the floor as if someone stuck it there on purpose. Every morning something new appeared. I tried telling myself it was a prank, that someone was messing with me. But deep down I knew her patience. I knew her persistence, and she had found me before. She could find me again. One night, heading back to the dorm, the air vibrating with cold wind, I drove across the coulees. It was 3 in the morning, the kind of time when the world feels empty. My headlights caught something up ahead. Someone stood in the middle of the path, perfectly still, staring straight at me, not blinking, not moving, just waiting. My breath caught in my throat. I slowed the car, afraid to get closer, afraid to stop. When the figure turned slightly, I noticed the hair, long, red, familiar. I swerved around her and sped away, heart pounding like it might tear through my chest. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if she was turning to watch me leave. The fear didn't end in the dorms or on the roads. My mom and brother live near the river valley now, in a small house with thin windows. Every night they hear something dragging across their backyard, something heavy sliding slowly, like wet rope or a body pulled through grass. My brother once opened the curtain to look, but Mom yelled for him to stop. She said some things should not be seen. Now every time my phone buzzes at night, I wonder if it's them. I wonder if something finally got too close. I wonder if she is waiting for me again, because she always waits. She always appears, and I never know when the next time will be. Last night I heard a knock at my door, slow, steady. 3 taps, then silence. I waited, breath held, hoping it was a delivery, hoping it was a friend, hoping it was anything except who I feared. When I finally opened the door, nothing was there. Nothing but a single feather resting on the floor, gray and soft. I closed the door slowly, locking it twice. I know she is out there. I know she has waited years before. I know she doesn't give up, not even when the police get involved, not even when families move, not even when time tries to bury old memories. And now, I think she is closer than ever. Tonight, as I write this, I hear something outside my window. The sound is faint, like fingers dragging lightly across the glass. I try not to look, try not to breathe too loudly, but curiosity crawls through me. I lift my eyes. A shadow stands on the other side of the glass. Long hair. Still body. Unblinking eyes. She found me again. And this time, I don't think she plans to leave. I woke up to the sound of wind whispering against the window, like someone breathing on the glass. My name is Nora, and I grew up in Fort McMurray, a small oil town buried deep in the woods of Alberta. I never believed in ghosts or demons, not until the winter when I was 17. That year, everything changed. I was the kind of girl who liked dark clothes and loud music, the one teachers called a quiet storm. I didn't fit in, but I didn't care. When a new boy showed up in school, everyone noticed. His name was Jace. He had a scar under his lip, black hair that always looked wet, and the kind of stare that felt too heavy to hold. I told myself I didn't care, but the way he sat alone, reading old books and ignoring everyone, pulled me in like gravity. We started talking after class one day. I made some joke about how Fort McMurray was so boring even ghosts left town. He laughed, and that laugh stayed with me. Within weeks, we were together. He wasn't like anyone I'd ever known. Smart, secretive, always writing strange things in a small black notebook. I didn't know it then, but that notebook would become part of a nightmare. Back then, my mother was in and out of rehab. I spent most nights alone in our cold little house. One week, she disappeared again, and I had no food, no heat, nothing. Jay said I could stay with him for a while. His family lived near the edge of town, in a house that looked like it had been forgotten by time, the kind that leaned into the forest like it was hiding something. His parents were polite at first. They smiled too much, though, and the smell of burnt chemicals clung to the air. Jace's dad worked on the oil fields. His mom stayed home, always wearing long sleeves even when it was hot. There was a basement room for me next to Jace's. It had low ceilings and one small window that faced the frozen ground outside. I told myself it was temporary, just until things got better. But they never did. Jace started acting strange after I moved in. He'd zone out in the middle of a sentence, like he was listening to someone only he could hear. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I'd hear him talking to himself in that same low voice he used when he read from the notebook. When I asked about it, he'd just smile and say he didn't remember. One night around 2:17 a.m., I woke up to scratching. It was soft at first, like fingernails against wood, but it came from the inside of Jace's door. I thought maybe he was having a nightmare, but when I called his name, the scratching stopped. I froze, waiting, and then something hit the wall hard. I wanted to run upstairs, but the house was silent again, and somehow that was worse. The next morning, he acted normal. We walked to school, but he kept staring at the trees like they were whispering to him. That same week, I started finding oily handprints on my car windows, always after midnight. The prints were long, stretched, and too thin to be human. Every time I wiped them away, they came back darker. Jace laughed it off, said maybe his dad was messing with me, but I could see he didn't believe it either. The town was quiet that winter. Snow buried everything, and the air always smelled like metal. Everyone said Fort McMurray had ghosts from the old mining days. Men who never left the oil sands. I didn't believe it until I started hearing the knocks. It was late one night, maybe 3:10 a.m., when the first one came. 3 slow knocks from the wall behind my bed. I thought it was the pipes until I realized the wall connected to Jace's room, not the plumbing. When I went to check, he was sitting on his bed staring at the floor. "They won't stop," he whispered. "Who won't stop?" He looked up at me then, and his eyes were wet and unfocused. "The ones from the sand," he said. "They don't like you here." I laughed because I didn't know what else to do. But then he started shaking, and I saw scratches up and down his arms. Deep, thin cuts, fresh. He said he woke up with them. I should have left right then. The next night was worse. I heard the same scratching again, louder this time, and something heavy dragging across the floor. I peeked through the crack in his door and saw him standing there, facing the corner, whispering to the wall. His back was arched, and his fingers twitched like they were pulling invisible strings. The air in the hallway smelled like burnt oil and iron. When he turned, his face wasn't his. His mouth hung open too wide, and his eyes were black from corner to corner. He took a step toward me, slow and jerky, like a puppet trying to remember how to move. I slammed the door and ran to my room, locking it. The knocking started again, this time from both sides of the wall. I stayed up all night, holding my phone, waiting for morning. When the sun came, he was fine again, smiling, joking, like nothing had happened. I wanted to tell his parents, but when I went upstairs, his mother was staring out the window, whispering to herself. I asked if she was okay. She turned slowly, and her eyes were glazed over. "He's not Jace anymore," she said. "He belongs to them now." I ran back downstairs, packed my bag, and decided to leave that night. But as I opened the basement door, I froze. On the floor were dozens of USB drives scattered like seeds. I picked one up and plugged it into my laptop. The screen lit up to a video of me sleeping in the basement. The camera was shaky, the angle wrong, like it had been placed near my bed. I opened another file. It was the same. Me, asleep, over and over. I turned around and saw Jace standing behind me, holding another USB between his fingers. "Why are you watching my tapes?" he asked. "Your tapes?" I stammered. "What are you talking about?" He smiled, and his teeth looked too sharp. "They tell me to record," he whispered. "They say I'll see them again if I do." Then the lights went out. I heard his breathing first, close to my ear, and then something cold brushed against my neck. I pushed past him and ran to the small basement window. The wind outside howled, but I didn't care. I punched through the screen and climbed out into the snow. My hands bled, my feet were bare, but I didn't stop running until I reached the main road. I called the police from a gas station. They searched the house but found nothing. No USB drives, no black notebook, no Jace. His parents swore I'd never lived there. The basement was empty, dust and nothing more. For months I tried to forget. I moved to Edmonton, started over, but sometimes I wake up and find oily handprints on my window again. Sometimes I hear those same 3 knocks from the wall. Last week, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a single USB drive. The file name said 2:17 a.m. I haven't watched it yet. I grew up far from busy places, in a quiet stretch of Medicine Hat where farms spread for miles and the nights felt too large for any one person to stand in. Our house was an old Victorian place with creaking floors, tall windows, and a history people whispered about but never explained. It stood by a narrow road that barely saw more than 3 passing cars after dark, and just across that lonely road, tucked a little past the opening of a cornfield, stood a shack that never felt right to me. Everyone in town said it was just another leftover from the first owner of our home, a man who built barns, sheds, and anything he thought the land needed. But as a kid, that shack felt like a place where sound went to die. My name is Callum, and even back then, I understood fear better than I understood most things. I never liked how the shack sat crooked, how its doorway gaped open as though it waited for someone to walk into its mouth. When my friends and I were younger, we dared each other to step inside, creeping over soft dirt and broken boards with our hearts pounding, only to find old bottles, piles of metal scraps, ruined tools, and nothing that proved our nightmares true. No power. No furniture except things tossed aside. No reason for it to feel alive, yet it did. Years passed, and I got used to the shack the same way a person gets used to a scar. It was there, and I stopped looking too long in its direction. I grew older, started working part-time at a truck stop just outside the town limits, and tried not to think about the shadows that collected inside that doorway when the sky went dark. I did not go near it unless someone dared me, and even then, I pretended more bravery than I felt. One cold night when I was in my teens, I was lying in my room watching an old TV show, trying to stay awake for no real reason. Outside my window, a flicker of light caught my eye. It flashed once, then again, as if someone far away were signaling through the dark. I brushed it off as headlights from the rare car passing by, though the road was empty when I glanced out. I forced myself not to stare. I turned the volume up. I pretended I wasn't uneasy. But an hour later, the light came back, this time not flickering but stretching across the yard like a pale being pointed straight at my window. It didn't move. It didn't shake. It didn't fade. It stayed there, bright and steady, as though whoever held it wanted me to notice. The clock read close to midnight, and I remember feeling like something outside was waiting for me to react. Everyone else in the house was asleep, and even though I hated being afraid, I also hated not knowing the cause. So I walked quietly to my parents' room. I knocked. They didn't want to get up. I went to my brother's room. He didn't move an inch. Nobody cared about the strange light but me, and I stood alone in the hallway with a tight feeling in my chest. Against all good sense, I went back to my room, grabbed a small pocket knife I always kept near my dresser, and took the flashlight from my desk drawer. My hands were shaking before I even stepped outside. The night air felt colder than before, thin and sharp, the kind that made every sound echo too loudly. When I got close to the road, The light across the way snapped off so fast that I took a step back and almost dropped my flashlight. It felt like whatever had been shining toward me knew I was coming. I didn't want to go farther, but fear can make a person stubborn. I crossed the empty road, pushed through the edge of the corn rows, and followed the faint path toward the shack. I told myself I'd be in and out in seconds, just enough time to make sure nobody had wandered inside. But the closer I came, the quieter the world grew. No wind, no bugs, no rustle of animals. Only the crunch of my shoes and the pounding of my heart. The doorway had no door, so I stepped through slowly, sweeping my flashlight from side to side across the clutter. Old tools, rotting wood, things my father had tossed inside for later disposal. Then I noticed the shape in the corner of the shack, an old recliner he had dragged out there months earlier because he never found time to haul it to the dump. It faced the wall, or so I thought. But when I swept the light across the worn fabric, I saw the top of the chair move, just a fraction, like someone sitting in it had breathed too deeply or shifted ever so slightly. I froze. I could hear my pulse inside my teeth. I lifted the flashlight again, slower this time, and raised the beam toward the chair. That was when a man stood up from behind it. He didn't speak, didn't gasp, didn't flinch at the light in his face. He rose like he had been waiting, like he had been listening to me walk from my house to the shack. He was middle-aged, maybe older, with a jacket hanging off his shoulders and hair that looked too messy to belong to someone who cared about being seen. His face was impossible to read, shadowed in all the wrong places. His hands hung by his sides, loose but ready. He didn't blink. He didn't turn his head. He just stood there watching me the way a fox watches whether a rabbit will run. I ran before he even moved. I bolted out of the shack, across the dirt, through the corn, past the shallow ditch, and onto the empty road. I didn't look back until I was almost at my yard, gasping for air and terrified I might fall before reaching the door. But something made me stop. Maybe fear, maybe disbelief, maybe the need to know if he followed. I turned. The man was standing in the middle of the road, exactly between me and the shack. He wasn't running, he wasn't hunched. He wasn't yelling for me to stop, he just stood there, still as stone, facing my house as though he had every right to be there. No sound came from him, no warning, no movement. It felt like he was deciding something in that silent moment, something about me. Then he turned around and walked slowly back toward the shack until he vanished inside the dark doorway. I sprinted the rest of the way home. I slammed the door, I locked it twice. I didn't sleep until the sky turned pale. I told my father the next morning, but he didn't believe a word. He laughed, said I probably saw a shadow, maybe an animal. He said nobody would hide in that shack. He swore he threw the recliner in there himself and nobody could sit in it without making noise. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I know the feeling that something had been watching me long before I noticed the light. Years have passed since then, and I still live in Medicine Hat. The shack is still standing. The recliner is still inside. Nobody else has seen the man, at least not that they admit. But the story doesn't end there. Life here has a way of making strange things normal, until one day they aren't. Like how a couple down our street kept finding their backyard gate open every morning, even after installing a heavy lock. Their camera caught nothing at all, no movement, no shadow, just a gate swinging wide sometime after 2 in the morning, as if pushed by invisible hands. Or the man who lived a few houses away who kept hearing footsteps above him every night, slow and steady across the attic floor. The strange part was that the attic access hatch was nailed shut, sealed from the outside, untouched for years. Or the woman who worked the late shift at a small grocery store in town and kept seeing the same tall figure in a dark hoodie on every aisle she walked down, always ahead of her, always turning the corner before she could get close. She said he never bought anything, never spoke, never made a sound, but each time she blinked, he was standing in a new place watching. Medicine Hat is small, but strange things happen in small places where shadows don't need to hide behind crowds. And every time something odd happens, someone always brings up the old shacks scattered across the farmland, The ones built by men long gone, the ones nobody bothers to tear down. They say these shacks remember people. They say sometimes people remember them back. As for me, I don't go near that shack anymore. Not after what happened again last year. It was a late night, close to 2:17 a.m., and I was walking home after my shift at the truck stop. The road was empty, the sky too dark, the wind too soft to trust. I tried not to look at the shack as I passed, but my eyes drifted toward it anyway. The doorway was darker than usual, deeper, like a hole in the world. Then the light appeared again, not from a flashlight this time. From inside the shack, a dim glow, faint but real, shimmered around the frame of the recliner, as if someone had placed a lantern on the floor. I stopped walking, my lungs tightened. I didn't dare move closer, and then a shadow stood up inside the glow. Not fast, not slow, just steady. It was him. The same shape, the same height, the same height, the same stillness. I didn't wait to see more. I didn't wait for him to step into the doorway. I ran all the way home, sprinting until my chest hurt, until the sky felt too heavy to breathe under. I never told anyone, not even my father, who still thinks I made up the whole thing when I was younger. But I know what I saw, twice. And sometimes at night when the road gets quiet, I think about the recliner facing that window. I think about how he sat in complete silence staring at my house long before I ever walked inside. I think about why he stood when I shined the light on him. I think about how he followed only far enough to let me see he wasn't gone. I think he waits. I think he knows I haven't told the truth about everything. Because some nights, when it gets close to midnight, I still see that thin beam of light move across my window for just a moment before it vanishes. I don't know if he stands in the road anymore. I don't know if he walks through the fields. I don't know if he enters houses the way quiet things sometimes do. But I do know the shack is still open, and I know the recliner is still facing my home. Marlon Doss was born in the cold edges of northern Alberta, always believed that the strangest stories lived in the smallest towns. He grew up in a cabin outside Grande Prairie, surrounded by wind-cut fields and long shadows where things often moved without explanation. It started 2 weeks earlier in a quiet neighborhood on the east side of Grande Prairie, a place where the wind pressed against houses at night and the street lamps flickered from frost, where a woman named Liana lived with her daughter Mara. Liana never expected anything unusual in her life. She worked long hours as a receptionist at a dental office. She kept to herself, and trouble never followed her. But one Friday morning around 9:15 a.m., she opened the front door to find a bouquet of fresh lilies resting on her porch, still cold from the wind. Tucked between the petals was a tiny card with slanted handwriting that read, "Do these smell better?" There was no explanation, no name, no sender. Liana stood there confused, staring at the note as if waiting for the words to rearrange themselves into something sensible. Better than what? She wondered if someone mixed up the delivery. She asked her boyfriend, who stayed with his kids during the week and only came by on weekends, but he said he had ordered nothing and the message disturbed him as much as it did her. She told her ex-husband, her sister, and a couple of co-workers, but nobody claimed responsibility or even understood the strange message. She called the flower shop, but they refused to tell her who placed the order, saying they were not allowed to disclose sender information, and that made it feel even more unsettling. Nothing else happened for a while, and they all tried to brush it off. But uneasiness began settling into their house like a cold draft through the windows, especially at night when Mara and her mother were the only ones home. Mara, who had just moved back home after ending her marriage, worked late evenings and usually came home around 9 or 10 p.m., stepping into the quiet house while her brother worked night shifts and was gone until sunrise. She tried not to worry, but every time she walked through the door and saw her mother sitting tense on the couch, she felt the pressure growing around them. The second delivery arrived on a Thursday afternoon around 2:36 p.m. Liana texted Mara at work, saying she had just received another bouquet. This time it came with chocolates and another note that was even stranger than the first. It read, "White, blue, red, and green buttons falling from a tree. The spelling looked rushed, letters uneven, almost like someone wrote it in a moving vehicle or with shaking hands. At least the first note made half sense, Mara thought, but this one was pure nonsense, a sentence broken off from some idea no one else was supposed to understand. The moment her mom texted her a picture of the note, Mara felt something pull tight inside her chest. She wondered if someone was playing a prank, but neither of them could think of anyone who would go this far. She told her mother to call the shop again, but they repeated the same thing: "We cannot disclose that." That night, Mara could barely sleep. Every noise felt louder than before. Every faint creak in the hallway made her sit up and look at her door. When the wind brushed against the siding, it felt like someone dragging their fingers across the house. Then the third incident happened, and this time it did not come from the flower shop. It arrived as an Amazon package on a quiet Saturday morning around 10:11 a.m. Liana thought it was something she ordered, but when she opened the box, she found a children's book titled, "Have You Heard of Duncan Hale?" Duncan Hale was a historical figure who shared the same last name as Liana. The book was brightly colored, meant for small kids, and the question on the cover felt intentionally pointed, as if someone wanted her to notice the name and think about it. Neither Mara nor her brother had ordered it, and neither saw any reason why anyone else would send it. They were both adults, and even stranger, they didn't share their mother's last name anymore. Liana froze when she held the book. She stared at her last name printed in a bold, cheerful font, and a sharp uneasiness spread across her face. Mara watched her from the kitchen doorway and felt her stomach twist. Someone was not only sending flowers now, but they knew their names, their address, and they had made an effort to link the gift to her mother personally. It felt too intentional to be random, too specific to be coincidence. They were not sure what to do. Nothing overtly threatening had happened, but something felt deeply off, a slow creeping dread that someone was watching them without stepping forward, someone who seemed to know things they should not know. They tried to convince themselves that maybe it would stop, maybe it was a misguided gesture or a strange joke. But the fear of not knowing who was doing these things began to sit heavily in the house. That same night, something happened outside. Around 8:51 p.m., when the sun had disappeared and the cold air settled, Mara went out to take the garbage to the alley behind their yard. The backyard was dim, except for one weak bulb above the back door, and the shed near the fence cast a wide, dark shadow along the ground. As she stepped toward the bins, she suddenly felt a prickle on the back of her neck, that instinctive sense that someone else was there. She turned her head slowly, and for a split second, she saw movement beside the shed. Someone was crouching there, half hidden by the shadow. She froze, her breath stopping in her throat, her eyes locked onto the figure. But before she could speak or move, the person slid deeper behind the shed and disappeared from her view. Panic rushed through her body, and she stumbled backward toward the house. She slammed the door behind her and told her mother what she saw. Liana immediately called the police. Officers arrived around 9:29 p.m., walking through the yard with flashlights. They checked behind the shed, circling the property, and at first said they saw nothing. But then they noticed something strange. Fresh footprints in the frost led from the back fence, circled the shed, and stopped right beside the house beneath Mara's bedroom window. The officers recommended keeping the house locked and maybe installing cameras, but because no one was hurt, nothing more could be done. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time Mara closed her eyes, she imagined the crouching figure stepping closer to the window, watching her breathe, watching her move. Every creak in the walls felt like footsteps. Every shadow on the floor felt like someone standing over her bed. And the fear only grew. A few days later, around 1:04 a.m., a trucker driving down Highway 40 noticed something strange in the dark sky above the road. A small drone hovered over the lane, following him steadily no matter how he changed speed or direction. It stayed with him for 30 minutes straight before peeling off toward a cluster of houses in eastern Grand Prairie, the same area where Liana and Mara lived. The trucker later mentioned it to a coworker, but no one else reported seeing a drone that night. The next morning, Mara checked the mailbox while leaving for work. Inside it was a blank envelope. No return address, no writing, nothing. She opened it right there on the driveway. Inside was a tiny piece of fabric that looked torn, frayed at the edge. She stared at it for a moment before her stomach dropped. It was a piece from her own jacket, the one she wore when she took out the garbage the night she saw someone behind the shed. Someone had been close enough to touch her. She nearly dropped the envelope. She ran inside, her legs trembling, yelling for her mother. Leanna took the fabric, her fingers shaking, and Mara could tell that her fear had turned into something closer to terror. Someone had been close enough to take a piece of her clothing, and they knew exactly where to send it. By that evening, the atmosphere in the house felt thick. Even breathing felt heavy. Mara kept glancing at every window, every corner of the yard. The feeling of being watched grew stronger, as if eyes followed her through the house. When darkness fell around 7:45 p.m., the sound of something tapping lightly against the siding echoed through the living room. Liana and Mara both looked up. It happened again, a slow tap that didn't match the rhythm of the wind. They turned off the lights, stood still, and listened. The tapping moved from the left side of the house to the back, then stopped. Mara wanted to call the police again, but her mother shook her head. She feared the police would think they were imagining things, that without proof they wouldn't help. Still, the uneasiness refused to settle. Around 2:17 a.m., Mara woke to a faint buzzing sound outside her window. A low, steady hum. She slowly sat up, her eyes adjusting to the darkness. She stood and walked to the window, her heart pounding so hard she felt it in her throat. When she pulled back the curtain just an inch, she saw something hovering outside. A drone. It floated near her window, its small lights blinking faintly, almost softly, as if greeting her. Mara staggered back, covering her mouth to stop a scream. She ran to her mother's room, shaking her awake. When they both returned to the window together, the drone was gone, but the fear it left behind stayed. Days passed, each one heavier than the last. Liana's boyfriend visited on weekends, and when he was there, the tension in the house broke a little, but during the week, the fear returned full force. They slept with lights on, they kept their phones beside them, they checked the doors again and again. Yet no matter how tightly they locked the house, the sense of being watched never left. Then came the night everything collided. It was snowing hard, the wind pushing white sheets across the town when Mara heard footsteps outside around 3:09 a.m. They were soft but steady, crunching through the snow. She moved to her window, but the frost made it hard to see. She went downstairs quietly and peered through the living room blinds. At first, she thought the snow was playing tricks on her. But then she saw a figure standing in the yard near the shed, not crouching this time. Standing completely still, facing the house. Her breath hitched. She stepped back slowly, her shaking hands reaching for her phone. She whispered for her mother, and together they watched the unmoving figure. Then, as if sensing their eyes, it tilted its head slightly toward them. Not enough to show a face, but enough to show awareness. The figure lifted an arm. It held something small between its fingers, a tiny piece of fabric. Another one. Liana dialed the police immediately. But before officers could arrive, the figure stepped backward into the darkness, vanishing behind the shed once more. When police searched the yard, they found footprints again, but this time they saw something worse. The prints led from the shed to the side of the house, stopping right beneath the living room window where Mara and her mother had stood moments earlier. The officer's flashlight beam trembled slightly as he examined the ground. Inside the shed, they found no person, but they did find a small device on the floor. It was a drone controller, still warm from being used. Fear became suffocating. Officers suggested the family stay somewhere else temporarily. But Liana refused to leave her home. She said running would make things worse, that whoever was tormenting them would know they had control. But that night, as the wind howled across the neighborhood, Mara heard something new, breathing. Right outside her bedroom window, slow, steady, close enough to fog the glass. She froze in bed, unable to move, unable to scream. She squeezed her eyes shut while tears streamed down her face. When she finally gathered the courage to look, she saw nothing through the blinds, only darkness. But she heard one soft exhale, as if someone whispered on the other side of the wall. The next morning, they found no footprints beneath her window, even though fresh snow had fallen overnight. almost as if whoever was there floated instead of walked, or had been standing there before the snow stopped. The police increased patrols. The neighbors were alerted. Security cameras were installed. But the sense of danger did not leave. It became part of the house, part of the floorboards, part of the cold air. Marlon's voice lowered as he told the last part, the part that still gave him chills whenever he recalled it. 1 week later, a package appeared on the porch. Plain, unmarked. Inside, it was a single sheet of paper with a message written in the same crooked handwriting as before. You stopped smelling the flowers. Under the note was a tiny drone camera. Its lens cracked. Someone had been recording them. Someone had been close enough to touch their things, follow their movements, learn their routines. The case remained open, unsolved. Some nights, Mara still swears she hears tapping on the siding or sees a shadow move near the shed. Some nights she wakes at 2:17 a.m. and checks her window, afraid a new drone will be waiting. Marlon said he doesn't know who did it or why, but he believes the person never stopped watching. That some people disappear into the dark not because they are gone, but because they learn how to hide better. And in a small town like Grande Prairie, hiding is easy. Watching is easier. I never knew how fast a quiet place could turn into something that eats at your mind, but I learned the hard way. I learned in a small Alberta town called Airdrie, a place that looked soft and simple from far away, a place with wide streets, cold winds, and houses that all looked like they were cut from the same shape. I came here because I needed space, because my old life felt like it was falling apart, because my job was grinding me down, and because my family was a storm I could not live inside anymore. For years, everything in me felt stretched thin, and I thought distance would fix me. I thought Airdrie would be quiet enough for me to breathe again. My name is Markram, and back then I was 25, working long shifts at a small repair shop outside town. My sister, who was 30, lived in a rented house with 3 roommates. She knew things were bad for me at home, so she let me stay whenever I needed. Most nights I slept on a fold-out bed in her office room on the ground floor, next to a small bathroom. I thought it would be a peaceful place to recover, but I had no idea how wrong I was. Before I go into the darkest parts, you need to understand one thing. The person I am today is not the one who lived that year. The past version of me was tired, scared, quiet, and always trying not to upset anyone. I grew up that way because our parents never stopped shouting. My sister left the house early, and I carried the weight of everything after she was gone. By the time I reached my 20s, I felt more like a shadow than a person. So when strange things started happening around me, I always doubted myself first. I always assumed I misunderstood something, or imagined it, or deserved it. Only now, years later, can I see how dangerous that thinking was. My sister's roommates were all adults around my age or older. One was friendly and open, a guy named Ben who laughed too loud but cared a lot. Another was a quiet man named Rowan who kept to himself, barely spoke, and hid in his room whenever anyone else was home. His partner Mira was even quieter. She almost never talked, never smiled, and walked around with the soft steps of someone who had practiced moving without sound. They were strange but not creepy at first, just awkward, just private. In a shared house, you learn to look away from odd behavior. I think back now and wonder if that was the first mistake. The story begins the first winter I spent sleeping in that office room. The cold outside was sharp, the kind of cold that crept into your bones even when heat was running. The room was always warm, almost too warm, so I kept the door cracked open at night. I never thought twice about it. The first unsettling thing happened somewhere around 2:17 a.m. I remember the numbers glowing on my phone screen. I had stayed up late doing some paperwork for my job, trying to finish things I should have done earlier in the week. I kept hearing the shower in the bathroom next to the room, which was strange only because it was so late, but these were adults living their own lives, so I ignored it. When the water stopped, the house went very quiet. I was typing on my laptop when I felt a presence, like pressure in the air. I turned my head toward the cracked door, and there, standing in the thin slice of hallway light, was Mira. She just stood there, still. silent. Her face was blank, her eyes fixed on me. She wore normal clothes, nothing strange about that, but the way she stared made my skin crawl. I whispered her name to ask if she needed something, and she stepped back so quickly it made the door rattle. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe she just needed something from the office. Maybe she was tired and zoned out. Humans do weird things when exhausted. This was the story I told myself over and over. But something inside me knew it was not right. A few weeks later, something happened to Ben that shook the whole house. He came home one afternoon angry, pacing around, saying someone had been looking through his office window from outside. He showed us fingerprints on the glass, smudged in a way that proved someone had pressed their face close enough to see in. His office was at the front of the house, facing the street. Anyone could walk up, but it still felt too personal, too targeted. He called the police. They came, looked around, asked some questions, and left. They said it might be a prank, maybe a random passerby, maybe someone checking houses to break in. They had no evidence, no direction, nothing to follow up on. That answer didn't calm anyone. Ben was scared. And when a person who usually laughs at everything becomes silent and jumpy, it changes the whole house. To make everyone feel safer, he installed security cameras both inside and outside. He put them up one weekend while Rowan and Mira were away visiting family. I remember thinking that maybe it would help us all sleep easier. I was wrong. One night, not long after the cameras were installed, I came to stay again because work had drained every bit of me. I fell asleep early on the fold-out bed. Door cracked, warm air filling the room. I woke up around 3:10 a.m. to a faint shuffle outside my door, slow, dragging steps. I thought maybe someone was getting water, but the steps stopped right at the door. I held my breath. The door creaked open just a little, and the hallway light formed a thin line across my blanket. No one spoke. No one moved. It felt like the whole world froze. Then I saw movement, a shadow shifting. I forced myself to whisper a soft hello, and the shadow jerked away like it had been burned. Footsteps rushed down the hall. The bedroom doors closed. The next morning, I convinced myself it was Rowan. He sleepwalked, maybe, or needed something. Normal explanations made me feel less insane, but that day, something worse happened. Something that made my stomach twist. I found a printed sheet of paper on the small side table in the office room. It had been placed there deliberately. It was a printout of a woman's private Instagram messages, all conversations I had never seen before. They were screenshots, printed in black and white, with her name covered by marker. The messages were harmless, but the idea that someone printed them and left them next to where I slept made my heart pound. I threw the paper away and told no one. Another week passed. Then a teen biking home down our street was followed by a black SUV with no plates, driving slow behind him. He told the neighbors. The story spread around the block, and everyone grew tense. People locked their doors earlier. People looked out windows more. Something was wrong in our area, and all of us felt it. The real breaking point came when Ben looked through the security footage one afternoon. I had just come home from work when I heard him yelling my name. His voice sounded different, tight, full of fear. When I walked into the living room, he told me to sit down. He said he had to show me something. On the screen was footage from inside the house, taken late at night. I watched myself sleeping in the office room. Door cracked, blanket rising and falling with my breathing, and then the shadows moved. Mira stepped into view, standing just outside the door. She leaned forward, watching me. Not for seconds, for minutes. Sometimes she stood completely still. Other times she tilted her head slowly, like she was studying a painting. The footage kept going. Another night. Another watch. Another. My throat felt dry. But then Ben played something even worse. Footage from outside the window. Someone, their body shape matching Rowan, walked up to the window after I showered one evening. I had been drying my hair in a towel, unaware anyone was outside. He stood there, face close to the glass, watching through the thin opening at the side of the blinds. It went on far too long. My whole body went cold. I could not breathe. I could not speak. Something inside me broke. Ben said that was not all, that he found more, that he was sorry he didn't know sooner. He showed footage from the kitchen, taken late at night, Rowan and Mira messing with things I had bought, tampering with food, pouring something into my drinks, stirring things that were mine, laughing quietly to themselves, working together like it was some secret ritual. I felt sick remembering the week I had been violently ill for no reason. Ben said he wanted me to hear everything, so he told me what happened when he confronted them. He said he barged into their room while recording, wanting answers. What he found was worse than anything he imagined. In their room were my missing shirts, hung on the wall like decorations. There were drawings of me sleeping, detailed sketches from angles only possible if someone stood over me. There were notebooks full of strange writing, my name repeated over and over. Words scribbled out, phrases that made no sense. A long poem titled Ode to Markram. Ben gave them a choice. Leave the house within 12 hours and never contact any of us again, or he would call the police and hand over everything. They left. No fight, no explanation, no goodbye. For months after, nothing happened. I stopped staying there overnight. I avoided that side of town. I tried to forget, but forgetting is something my mind does not know how to do. Time passed. But the story does not end there. One morning early, around 7:45 a.m., I woke up in my own apartment miles away from Airdrie. I walked into the living room, rubbing my eyes, ready to make coffee. But then I froze. There were muddy footprints on the floor, not in the entrance, not near the door. They led from the hallway window straight toward my bedroom door. Prints too large to be mine, too heavy. Each one pressed deep like someone stepped down with force. My stomach twisted. I checked the locks. Nothing was broken. Nothing was forced open, but the window latch was slightly bent. I looked outside. Snow was on the ground. No footprints in the snow. Someone got in without leaving a trace. My phone buzzed. I flinched so hard I dropped it. When I picked it up, my heart almost stopped. A message. No name, no number, no number. Only one sentence. Still watching. I moved out of that apartment the same week. I never told my sister. I never told Ben. What would I even say that would not sound insane? Years have passed since then. I live in another town now. A louder one, a busier one. Places full of people feel safer, even if that makes no sense logically. I keep my doors locked. I keep curtains closed. I check windows twice before sleeping. Sometimes I wake up at night and swear I see a shadow shift near the hallway. Sometimes I hear soft steps. Sometimes I feel watched. Last month, a plain envelope showed up on my porch. No name, no stamp, no return address. Inside was a single printed picture. It showed me standing at my kitchen counter from behind, taken through a window. Someone had been there. Someone close. On the back of the photo, written in tiny letters, were 3 words. Not done yet. And every night since, before I sleep, I swear I feel air moving under my bedroom door, slow and steady, like someone is standing on the other side. I grew up in St. Albert, a quiet place where people knew each other by name and secrets slipped between houses like drifting snow, settling in cracks until winter swallowed everything whole. My name is Leonard, and I never thought fear would return to me after what happened in my childhood. But fear is patient. It waits, and in small towns it grows like frost under the skin. Back then, my mother said something lived in the river valley that fed on silence, something that hated the sound of people walking alone after dark. Everyone dismissed her, but she was the first person in our neighborhood to keep the curtain shut all year, the first to say the lights flickered because something outside wanted in, the first to tell me that danger in St. Albert did not always look human. I forgot her warnings, at least until the lockdown changed my life. I worked as a traveling tech consultant before borders closed. With airports shut and offices empty, I had nowhere to work. My normal co-working space shut its doors, and the city's coffee shops felt more dangerous than any haunted story I heard as a kid. That's when my friend suggested I use the old office space behind his property, quiet and empty, with a private kitchen and lounge just for me. It sounded perfect. Only one problem. I would have to park on the road. The road curved downhill along the edge of the Red Willow Park, a long stretch of trees, trails, and shadows. During the day it looked peaceful, but at night it swallowed the moonlight and moved like a living thing. Streetlights lined only the houses on one side, while the park side stayed dark, too dark, almost deliberate. The first night I worked there, I noticed a strange thing. The patio furniture outside the old office moved slightly every morning, as if someone touched it, maybe rearranged it. I brushed it off as wind, but the chairs changed angle too cleanly, lined up almost perfectly, pointing toward the tree line in the park. That wasn't wind, and every night I felt watched, though I told myself the feeling was nonsense. The second strange thing happened a few days later. I took a walk through the park behind the office, just to stretch my legs, and found a small notebook lying in the grass. Nothing unusual, until I opened it. Inside, names filled the pages, with ages and daily walking routes of local children, written in careful, almost elegant handwriting. At first I thought it belonged to a teacher or a camp guide, but the notes were too detailed, too private, describing where each child hesitated, where they looked behind them, where they ran. I dropped the notebook instantly. Something was wrong in St. Albert, something far from normal. But my mind shoved it all away because work was my only anchor in the lockdown. I had a scheduled call with a company in Toronto, and with the time difference, the meeting would start at 7:46 p.m. I stayed late preparing, lost in my laptop while the building outside went dark. Before leaving, I checked the small security monitor inside the office. My paranoia always pushed me to look. Nothing moved on the screen, just the empty walkway and the faint shimmer of frost on the pavement. Satisfied, I buzzed myself out, locked the door behind me, and stepped into the night. I regretted it immediately. Something felt wrong, like the air held its breath. When I reached the gate and looked up, a man I had never seen before stood near the roadside where my car was parked. He wasn't there on the security camera moments earlier, I was sure of it. He leaned against the fence like he didn't have a bone in his body, his head tilted, wearing torn gray jeans and a dark hoodie, but the hood was down despite the cold. His sneakers were soaked, as if he had been walking through the river. He stared at the ground until I walked onto the sidewalk, then slowly lifted his head. His eyes looked wrong, like someone else was inside them. I kept my pace steady and looked down, tracking him from the corner of my eye. My car sat alone in the empty line of parking spaces near the park entrance. Only my car. Only me. As I got closer, I saw him push himself off the fence, wobbling slightly, like he was drunk or high. He began walking diagonally, trying to intercept me. Then he spoke. "Let me help you with your bag, sir." His voice was soft, but the words sank like stones in the dark. I wore a backpack, nothing heavy, nothing I needed help with. People in St. Albert were kind, but not this kind, not at this hour, not in this weather. He was lying. He wasn't offering help. His hand stayed inside his hoodie pocket, and he started walking faster. That was when memory hit me, a memory of my mother's trembling voice telling me about the thing in the valley that watched people walk alone. I pushed the thought away, but it clawed back inside me. He took a sudden step toward me. Instinct exploded through my chest. I dodged left, then right, like I used to during football drills. If I ran to my car, still several meters away, he would catch me. Even if he didn't, fumbling with keys, opening the door, getting inside, locking it too slow, too risky. So I made the worst and best decision of my life. I jumped the fence into the dark of the park. One leap, but the backpack dragged me down. I landed hard, ripped it off my shoulders, grabbed it in my hand, and ran. The park felt alive, every tree watching, every shadow reaching. Behind me, the man crashed against the fence. Then I heard the metallic scrape of him climbing. He followed me. His voice slurred and cracked as he yelled, "Come back, I just want the bag." Just give me the bag. But something about his voice told me he wanted more than the backpack. I darted behind a massive old tree, one of the few that blocked the streetlight. I hid in the darkness, barely breathing. Footsteps stomped through the grass. He wasn't walking, he was charging, stumbling, hunting. He ran straight past me, toward the far side of the park. When he was far enough, maybe 40 meters, I made a break for it. Not quiet, just fast, pushing through branches and leaves. The sound betrayed me. He turned. He saw. His scream tore through the park. He sprinted back toward me, faster now, sharper, almost animal-like. A shimmer caught my eye. His hand was out of his pocket. A knife glinted under the faint moonlight. I bolted up the hill toward the parking lot, lungs burning. I raced around the tennis court instead of going back the way I came, and that mistake cost me distance. He was gaining, his footsteps slapping against the ground like wet leather. I reached my car, yanked the door open, jumped inside, slammed it shut, and locked it. My breath fogged the windshield. My hands shook violently as I started the engine. I looked out into the darkness. He was gone, not walking away. Not running. Gone. The kind of gone that meant he was still there. Somewhere. Watching. I drove out with my heart beating so loud it drowned everything else. I didn't look in the mirrors. I didn't want to see anything sitting in the back seat. But the horror didn't end there. The next morning, the patio furniture outside the office wasn't just rearranged. It formed a perfect circle, like something had stood in the middle waiting for me. The notebook I saw earlier returned. It lay on the doorstep. A new page was open. This time, the name written on it was mine. Under it, my age. Under that, my daily route, my work hours, my car description, my pace when I walked from the office to the gate. Someone had been timing me. Someone had been watching me long before that night. A cold realization sank into my bones. That man hadn't found me by accident. He didn't appear suddenly. He had been waiting for the right night, for the right moment, for me. And St. Albert, the small town I trusted, felt too quiet, too still, like everyone knew something I didn't. I still don't know what chased me that night. A man, a shadow, a hungry thing from the river valley, but I know it wasn't finished. Even now, some nights when I drive past the park, I see someone standing in the darkness where the light doesn't reach, head tilted, like a memory trying to remember me. And sometimes, I think it does. I never understood how a quiet place like Ladue could hold something dark until that night changed everything. People see Alberta towns as calm, slow places where the biggest noise after sunset is the train in the distance or the wind pushing snow across empty streets. But for me, the fear started long before the night my son told me a stranger was watching him. It began years earlier, when I was still a teenager living in the same house, but I never connected the signs until it was too late. Back then, my mother found a small black tracking device stuck under her car. She had no idea how long it had been there, and she had no enemies, no angry ex, nobody who would ever stalk her. The police said it was probably a prank, but I remember how cold her hands were when she held that device, like her body understood something her mind refused to accept. Ever since that day, tiny things kept happening. Missed calls from numbers we did not know, numbers that sometimes matched old neighbors who had died years earlier. Houses on our street marked with red X's during winter nights, especially homes with little kids. People whispered about it, but nobody wanted to believe it was real. Nobody wanted to see the pattern. I moved away for a few years, tried to build a normal life, got married, had 2 sons, and thought the unease had left me behind. But trouble has a way of circling back, and I never knew the past was only waiting for the right moment to open its eyes again. My name is Marin, and back then I was 27, raising my 2 boys mostly alone during winter months. My husband drove long routes in an old transport truck and swallowed highways for days at a time. He was good to us, but distance does strange things to a house. Silence becomes heavier. Shadows start to feel familiar, as if they know your schedule better than you do. And that night in Ladue, long after I tucked my sons in for dinner, every bit of my past fear came crawling back with claws. It was late January, the kind of night where Alberta cold feels sharp enough to cut through walls. I remember seeing the clock earlier in the evening. It was around 7:45 p.m. when I finished feeding the boys. Our older son, who was 3 at the time, was named Rowan, and our baby, barely months old, was named Corey. They were my whole world, and most nights I was too busy juggling baths and spilled food to think about the strange things that used to scare me. But the house we lived in had a long history, and I sometimes felt like the walls kept secrets that didn't belong to us. The layout of the house was strange. The toy room had a side door that opened onto a raised wooden deck. Nobody ever used it, not in winter, not even in summer most years, because the deck creaked like it had stories of its own. The side of the house had no lights at all. Not a porch light, not even a motion sensor, nothing but shadows. The yard stretched out behind it into a patch of trees that connected to a trail people rarely walked. Even in daylight it felt too quiet, as if the world forgot that side of the house existed. After dinner I put Corey in the bathtub and told Rowan he could play in the toy room until it was his turn. He loved that room even though it unsettled me. Maybe kids don't feel fear the way adults do, or maybe they see things adults try to ignore. I was finishing Corey's bath when I heard small footsteps running toward me. Rowan stopped in the bathroom doorway, his cheeks red from playing, his eyes wide like he had a secret. "Mom," he said softly, "there is a man looking through the side door. I think it is the mailman." My whole body froze. For a moment, the sound of water running down Corey's arms felt like it was happening in another world. Everything inside me went quiet in a way that only fear can cause. Because there were 2 problems with what Rowan said. First, no mailman comes at night in Alberta winter. Second, nobody ever goes to that side door. Not neighbors, not deliveries, not even us. The house had a front entrance with a porch light and a shoveled walkway. Anyone normal would use that. Yet my son was telling me someone was standing in the dark, outside a door, nearly forgotten by our family. I slowly lifted Corey from the bath, wrapped him in a towel, and placed him gently in his little chair. I told Rowan to sit next to him and not to move until I called for him. His face tightened with confusion, but he nodded and obeyed. He kept asking what was wrong, but I didn't want to scare him more than he already was. My heart was pounding so hard I could taste metal in my mouth. I had been alone too many nights, heard too many strange sounds, seen too many weird things in my childhood, and every part of me wanted to run. Instead, I walked to the kitchen, grabbed the largest knife I owned, and unlocked my phone in case I needed to call for help. Walking through the hallway toward the toy room felt like walking underwater. Every breath hurt. I held my phone out like a makeshift flashlight because the side of the house was completely swallowed by blackness. I reached the toy room door and stopped. The side door was mostly glass, and from where I stood, the shadows beyond it looked too still, too patient. I stepped closer, raised my phone to shine light through the glass, and as the brightness touched the deck, I realized something that made my knees weaken. The door was unlocked. I never left that door unlocked. Nobody did. The handle felt cold in a way that was not normal, like someone had touched it recently. My breath fogged the glass. I could almost feel someone's presence on the other side, even if I could not see them. Without thinking, I yanked the door open, knife ready, voice shaking as I shouted out into the night. The snow on the deck reflected just enough light for me to see what mattered most. There were footprints. Fresh ones. They came up the deck stairs and went back down again, trailing toward the trees behind the yard. The steps were spaced strangely, like whoever made them was not walking with normal speed, almost like someone was gliding between steps. I slammed the door shut and locked it. My hands shook so badly I could barely turn the bolt. I ran back to the bathroom where the boys waited, their little faces anxious, and locked the bathroom door too. I dialed the police and tried to keep my voice steady even though my lungs felt tight. While we waited, I gently asked Rowan if he recognized the man. He said no, but he said something that still chills me today. He told me the man smiled and waved at him for a long time. That one sentence carried every nightmare I had ever feared. A stranger standing in the dark, waving at my child, unseen by me, unnoticed by anyone else. When I asked what the man wore, Rowan mentioned a hat like the mailman's and no coat. Who stands outside in Alberta winter with no coat? Who walks through deep snow with bare hands and calm patience? The police arrived quickly. While waiting for them, I kept remembering the tracking device under my mother's car years earlier, the strange numbers that called late at night, the red X's on houses with children. I wondered if this was connected. I wondered if it had ever stopped, or if someone had just chosen a new family to watch. The officer who searched our property returned inside with a face that looked heavier than before. He asked me more questions before telling me something that tightened my stomach. He had seen footprints leading not just to the side deck, but also to the basement door and the kitchen window. Someone had circled the house, inspecting it like they were choosing an entry point, like they were waiting for the right moment. He advised me to have a family member stay the night and promised to follow the tracks as far as he could toward the tree line. But deep in my heart, I knew he would not find anything. People like this, whatever they were, did not leave answers behind. Only fear. My father-in-law drove over and slept on the couch with his gun beside him. My mother stayed on the phone for hours, terrified. I barely slept. Every sound in the house felt wrong. Every draft of cold air felt like breath on my neck. The police never called back, and in the morning the footprints had softened in the snow, fading into the same silence that had always covered Ladue. Life went on, but something inside me never returned to normal. For a while, things calmed down, though Rowan mentioned the waving man now and then, usually when winter nights stretched long. I put a blackout curtain over the side door and bought a stronger lock, but fear still lived in my bones. Sometimes we heard tapping sounds late at night, like tiny knocks coming from the walls. Sometimes the door handles felt warm, as if someone had touched them moments earlier. Sometimes I found little X's drawn in dust near the windows, faint but real. And sometimes my phone lit up with missed calls from numbers belonging to people who had passed away long ago. Maybe someone was watching us. Maybe someone had been watching my family for many years, before I was even grown. Maybe the stranger that smiled at Rowan had once followed my mother. Maybe the tracking device, the calls, the red marks on doors were all pieces of something bigger. Something patient, something that waited through generations. I still wonder if the man outside the side door was human at all. Rowan said he smiled the whole time without blinking, like he already knew him, like he had been waiting to be seen. Sometimes, when snow begins to fall and the world grows quiet, I stand at the kitchen window and look out at the tree line. And every winter night, without fail, there is a moment when I feel like something is looking back.